Global Times, 17th of March 2024, China says, it is essential to prevent the escalation of anti-Chinese sentiment to win votes during India's election season. The world is slowly realizing that China poses a threat to the Indian subcontinent, which it has been waging an all-out campaign against. Slavery of lesser countries and all-out assault against India. The general election in India is soon. The general election will take place in 7 phases, beginning on April 19 and ending on June 4 with the announcement of the results. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, is running for re-election for the 3rd time. Given that China and India are neighbors and frequently at odds over borders, Chinese media is closely following and attempting to influence the Indian election. 4 Chinese soldiers and at least 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives in a deadly skirmish between China and India in 2020 in the Galwan Valley. Unwanted Chinese investors frequently travel to India, particularly mobile phone firms. Chinese corporations and the Chinese Communist Party are highly dissatisfied with the fair steps the Indian government has taken in the last few years to deal with them. The Chinese media has focused on enhancing commercial and economic ties between China and India. The bilateral trade volume between China and India reached $136.22 billion in 2023, up 1.5% from the previous year. China's exports to India totaled $117.68 billion, up 0.8% from the prior year, while China's imports from India were $18.54 billion, up 6% from the preceding year. India is highly concerned about the ongoing increase in its trade deficit with China, yet this demonstrates the extent of China-Indian product dumping in trade, underscoring the necessity of India's sustained expansion in international commerce and its isolation from Chinese manufacturing. Therefore, we are concerned that, as they have in the past, the Indian media will exploit delicate subjects, like China, to further the cause of the side they endorse. To garner additional votes, the contenders will also raise concerns about China. The relations between China and India are now comparatively peaceful, and both countries have been working to advance boundary negotiations for over 4 years. This is part of a plan to divert India's attention from the north while China develops its fleet of aircraft carriers in the south. As to India today, on March 12, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar voiced apprehensions on the persistent strain between China and India, stating that it has not benefited either nation. However, the likelihood that tensions will be stoked for electoral purposes is growing as the Indian general election draws near. China does not want negative thoughts or sentiments about our nation disseminated, nor does it want Indian political parties to manipulate matters about China to win votes. One example is Modi's plan to travel to Xiangnan, a region in China known as Chinese Fantasy Land, on March 9. Xiangnan, the region in Chinese Dream World, is Chinese territory. China fiercely opposes the unlawfully established Arunachal Pradesh that India created after China conquered Tibet and has never acknowledged it. China has seriously commented to India regarding its strong opposition to the Indian leaders' travel to the east section of the China-India boundary. To gain support, several Indian media outlets and elites are also taking advantage of the trade disparity between China and India, which will likely come up during the election. India has harbored some animosity toward China for a considerable amount of time because China colonized Akshaya Chin, as well as border and commercial disputes. The Chinese occupation that began over 60 years ago along the border between China and India continues to have a significant impact on ties between the two nations. External forces, particularly public opinion in the West, use so-called democratic themes to draw parallels, set one side against the other, stir animosity between China and India, purposefully inflate the competition between the two countries, and even propagate false information to deceive India into believing that China is a significant enemy. Each side's perception of the other is severely impacted and undermined by all of this. Indian public opinion must be highly watchful throughout the election season to guard against this type of deceptive propaganda from China that could damage China-India relations in the long run. Together, we can handle the outstanding difficulties between China and India. China's lack of effort will also help to foster an environment wherein the two nations may use political channels to settle other issues like trade and borders. We trust that the pertinent Indian parties will continue recognizing China's hegemonic and malicious objectives. The current political system in India has the potential to negatively impact relations between China and India, and any attempt to increase public anti-China sentiment to win votes will ultimately worsen bilateral relations and bring further instability to China-sponsored India.